Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 24th of July, 2024. In fact, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Charles Malet. Welcome to the programme, Charles.
Thanks very much, Mike.
And by video link from Damascus, Vanessa Beeley. We're going to get kicked off with digital ID. And well, this article in the Times has been motivating quite a lot of people on social media. And so on, the headline is government-backed digital IDs to let people open bank accounts. The verification technology will let people use one method for everything from paying tax and buying alcohol to opening a bank account. And of course, as you might expect, the thrust of this article is convenience. It's all about the convenience of it and so on. But, you know, frankly, anybody that's been paying attention shouldn't be surprised that, in fact, Keir Starmer, who ran his campaign on changes, we've mentioned this several times, there's no change here at all. So let's just look at how there's no change, because if we go back to the King's speech in November 2023, well, this was a graphic we showed at the time, the main points of it, and close to the bottom there we've got Data Protection and Digital Information Bill, and the Tories were talking about being able to export data abroad. They were talking about a whole host of different supposedly data protection related things. But if we put that back on screen, we'll look at the new name for it, because it's exactly the same. It's now called the Digital Information and Smart Data Bill. This was in the King's speech just last week. So this is the new name for it, and it's pretty much dealing with the same sort of situation. So, but they are talking, there is one new aspect to this. They're talking about a new National Underground Asset Register that will give planners and excavators access to data. Now, this is interesting because this is something that Debbie's been talking about in recent weeks, the fact that the water companies don't have a clue where their underground infrastructure is. And then it also is talking about smart data schemes, which will allow sharing of customer data with authorized third-party providers. And this is key, particularly with medical information and so on, and as they develop the DNA databases, this is key. But if we look at digital identity itself, and just remind ourselves what this looked like under the previous government's documentation, and this won't have changed. One type of digital identity, they said, which could be developed under the trust framework, is similar to a wallet, but created securely on your device. It lets you store various trusted pieces of information about yourself. We call these pieces of personal information attributes, and you can choose when and with whom you share them, but probably never your whole wallet of information. And on the right-hand side there, you can see the graphic that they included, which includes things like your age, your qualifications, whether you've got a driving license, where you're resident, whether you're a pensioner or not, whether you're qualified to work in the country or not. This could include disclosing details from the government, they said, such as your legal name, date of birth, right to reside, to work or to study, as well as details from other organisations, such as your professional qualifications or employment history. And so this is, of course, not going to be run by the government themselves, but it's going to be run by private sector organisations. This is another public-private partnership here, and a whole host of organisations queuing up to get involved. So here's one, Digital ID, and let's look at another one, the Post Office. Now, bearing in mind what's going on with the inquiry into the Horizon IT scandal, is anybody likely to use the Post Office to provide a digital ID service, even if you were in agreement that this was a good idea? I don't think so. And then, of course, we've got Yoti. And Yoti is particularly interesting because this is already something which is being sold heavily to the younger generations in order to get ID for entering pubs, clubs and so on. But the Yoti citizen card has got to be well up on the in terms of the likelihood of them being chosen for the final contract. Maybe quite a number of these will be chosen at the end of the day, and there'll be some competition in the market. It's not just in the UK, of course, because this is a global agenda, as we all know, and the EU talking about exactly the same thing, that a digital ID and personal digital wallet for EU citizens, residents and businesses. It makes all kinds of things possible, according to the EU, and of course, what the story that's coming from the British government and from most people that are commentating on this from the establishment side are saying, of course, this will never be mandatory. You'll still be able to do things without digital ID. But I think anybody that's been paying attention over the last number of years knows that they will make life very, very difficult for anybody that wants to continue to do things the old way. And I mean, one example of that is HMRC and their claims that they will maintain their telephone lines for people that want to use traditional methods of communication. But in fact, they have systematically increased the wait times on their telephone service to make it so unpleasant and impossible for people to use it, that they're forced into the digital way of doing things. And of course, it's not mandatory, except it sort of is, because here's gov.uk and their one login system. And the idea of this is that you have a single login for every government service that you might use. And we shouldn't forget to mention online safety, because this is, of course, justifying digital ID checks, because if children have to be protected from online pornography, then of course you've got to be able to identify the person who's visiting your porn website. And that means you've got to be able to identify what age they are. They've got to be able to identify who they are. So this graphic from Ofcom saying children first see online porn at age 13 on average. 10% have seen it by age 9. 79% have seen violent porn by the age of 18. And so age assurance checks might include photo ID matching, facial age estimation, credit card checks, and the next one is digital identity wallets, which is exactly what we're talking about. So just to remind everybody what the government's position was on this, here is their comments from their FAQ. This is the previous government, of course. I'm sure the new government will update this and it won't look any different to the old one. But anyway, the claim that the UK government at the time was making was that or at least the claim that people were making about the UK government was that the government was creating a mandatory ID card. The UK government at the time said the proposed legislation does not include any proposal to create either a digital or physical ID card. The government is committed to making it as easy as possible for people to prove who they are online and access the services they need without creating mandatory ID cards. But as we've just, the point I've just made is that it will be effectively mandatory because it'll be so difficult for people to get access to services without it, that although they claim it won't be mandatory, in practice it will be. So we're saying that that's at the very least misleading. The next claim that they were worried about on the internet is that this will make it easier for hackers to get hold of people's data. And the fact that they were claiming was that cybersecurity is a critical priority for the government, that the government recognises how important it is to protect users and their data and have robust measures in place to ensure the security and integrity of online government services and systems, which is pretty ironic, bearing in mind the consistent efforts that the government has made to make it easy for hackers to get access to data and to publish it online, as we saw recently with the NHS hack in London and millions of records appearing online as a result. So we're going to say at the very least, this is misleading. And finally, then, the claim that sharing data in this way will erode my privacy rights, and the government then claiming that this is not true because the government has stringent data protection processes in place. All data sharing is compliant with data protection legislation and guidance published by the Information Commissioner's Office. This will remain the case for any and all data sharing subsequent to the proposed legislation, which is why they're completely reorganising the Information Commissioner's Office. They were under the previous legislation. They will continue to do so under this legislation. And part and parcel of this will be the ability for companies to export that data to other countries. So again, we're saying that at the very least, this is misleading. No change, because it's just continuation with the agenda that we were seeing up until now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the vulnerability of the groups that are already targeted, exactly like you say, with the youth who were specifically on the Yoti front for access to cinemas, they said, in 2020, when people were finally allowed to go out of their houses. And of course, the other thing, for the government to try and offer any kind of guarantee when everything is being conducted by third parties is absurd.
Yes. Now, Vanessa, let me welcome you to the programme. And we'll kind of, in a sense, staying in the same vein, because we're talking about data collection, bulk data collection in the broad sense, but actually looking in a bit more detail what we were talking about on Monday with respect to anti-Semitism?
Well, anti-Semitism, Unit 8200, and censorship and thought control, basically, by Israeli organizations. So this was an article that did actually appear in The Guardian. I think it was first published at the end of June and then was updated. Exclusive Israeli documents show expansive government effort to shape US discourse around the Gaza war. So let's have a look at what it actually says. The authors of this article are Lee Fang and Mike Paulson, I think. So last November, just weeks into the war in Gaza, Amichai Fikli, a brash 42-year-old Likud minister, so the same party as is led by Netanyahu, was called into the Knesset to brief lawmakers on what could be done about rising anti-war protests from young people across the United States, especially at elite universities. He's since led a targeted push to counter critics of Israel, and The Guardian has uncovered evidence showing how Israel has relaunched a controversial entity as part of a broader public relations campaign to target said protests at US college campuses. So let's have a look. The Concert, which is basically this nexus of organizations that are also described as a PR commando unit, referred to a sprawling relaunch of a controversial Israeli government program initially known as Killer Shlomo, designed to carry out what Israel called very sinister mass consciousness activities targeted largely at the US and Europe. Concert is now known as the Voices of Israel, previously worked with groups spearheading a campaign to pass so-called anti-BDS state laws that penalize Americans for engaging in boycotts or any other nonviolent protest of Israel. So then let's have a look at what they then say. It's worth reading this whole article because it is very detailed. Another group, CyberWell, a pro-Israel anti-disinformation group, led by former Israeli military intelligence and Voices officials, the Voices of Israel, has established itself as an official trusted partner to TikTok, Meta, helping both social platforms screen and edit content. A recent CyberWell report called for Meta to suppress the popular slogan "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," unfortunately not explaining that that was actually a statement put out by the Likud party originally. A spokesperson for CyberWell responded that it receives no government funding whatsoever from any country, and the organization's leadership is neither affiliated with nor compensated by Voices for Israel. The spokesperson added that CyberWell's funding comes from private donors from across a broad spectrum of political, religious, and communal interests committed to combating digital anti-Semitism. Well, that's very interesting because what I actually discovered when I started looking into this, when Mike pointed me towards this labyrinth bunny hole, was that the original authors had actually written a follow-up article on Lee Fang's private Substack, pro-Israel group censoring social media, led by former Israeli intelligence officers. Again, I really recommend reading this. It's full of details that were not in the Guardian original article. So what does he then say? He basically points out that when CyberWell was reached for comment regarding why the biographies of its staff and advisors were removed or were scrubbed from their website after the Guardian article, they said, highlighting the danger of generating false and misleading information, we were forced to remove the Our Team page for safety reasons. Following the publication of your story, our analysts were attacked and identified by name on X. Users shared your article and our employees' names with a wider network, and we became concerned for our staff's safety. Despite CyberWell's denial of ties to Voices of Israel, the organization's 2022 annual report listed its chief financial officer as Sagi Balasha, the first CEO of the organization, now known as Voices of Israel. The list of CyberWell advisors in the report also included IDF forces, Israeli Defense Forces spokesperson, Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, who was Israeli Corporate Records revealed to be a director of the research and intelligence arm of Voices, known as Keshet David, which is Hebrew for David's bow. Keshet David was initially headed by Yossi Kuprawasser, the former head of research in the IDF Military Intelligence Directorate, widely known as Amman, and an ex-director general of the Ministry of Strategic Affairs. Another advisor to CyberWell, Amos Yadin, previously led Amman. Now, in the article, they also then go on to point out, so the chief executive of CyberWell and 2 board members worked at the same private intel spin-off from Voices for Israel, and the director of this spin-off is an advisor to CyberWell. The CEO of Voices for Israel became effectively the CFO of CyberWell. So CyberWell was lying in their statement to The Guardian. So you have the executive director and founder, Tal Or Cohen Montameya, and Zohar Gorgel, a decorated IDF intelligence officer with over a decade of experience in various cyber and technology roles. Zohar spearheaded the effort against incitement to terror on social media platforms during the 2015-2016 wave of terrorism in Israel. And Zohar is a social and tech entrepreneur running fintech startup. So there you have immediately the connection to 8200, but it goes on. If we look at our story, so basically here it states that it was established between Talor and Zohar Gorgel. And then if we go on and look at other employees within the organization, so you have here Jonathan Hezroni, the digital policy and compliance analyst. He holds an MA in government, summa cum laude, and an LLB with distinction in law from Reichman University. Jonathan was admitted into the Israeli Bar Association in 2022 as a former analyst and analyst team leader in the research department of the IDF, military intelligence. He has extensive experience. And then if we look at the advisor, which was mentioned in the Li Fang subsequent article to The Guardian article, Major General Amos Yadlin, with over 40 years of service in the IDF. Yadlin served as the former chief of the IDF's military intelligence. So he was the chief, basically, we assume, of at least of one of the units, including perhaps the 8200. Prior to that, he served as defense attaché to the United States. Recently, Amos completed his position as the director of the Institute for National Security Studies at Tel Aviv University. And then when I basically went to the CyberWell website, if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, Mike and I had a slight disagreement of this. I feel that it is being basically slightly hidden from view. They are proudly funded, if I then blow up what it says in that bottom right-hand corner, proudly funded by the UGA Federation New York, United Jewish Appeal, the Federation of Jewish Philanthropies in New York, which is clearly part of the Zionist movement nexus, which is encouraging operations like the birthright voyages to Israel. In other words, the indoctrination of young Jewish teenagers and even younger in the United States. Then I started to look into the board of the UJA New York, and you here have Linda Morels. You can freeze frame this to read about her on the website. But what was really interesting, when I went to her LinkedIn profile, guess who she used to work for? For 15 years and 4 months, she was at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, board member, so from January 2017 until fairly recently, April 2023. And prior to that, she was a board member at the Tony Blair Faith Foundation. Isn't that bizarre that Tony Blair's name crops up in what is effectively a Zionist nexus? So coming back to CyberWell, this was part of their recommendations to the Meta Oversight Board. So CyberWell suggests the following content moderation measures be applied from the militarized group's approach to the phrase "from the river to the sea," due to the real world harm being committed under the slogan. So they're talking basically about posts on X and Facebook, Instagram, all of the meta complex, basically. So reduce ranking in the newsfeed, reduce in search, reviewing related hashtags that are sparking or mobilizing real-world harm, prohibit use of ads, fundraisers, commerce surfaces, and monetization tools when using this phrase. And then from their website itself, these are basically quick facts 2023. So it's saying it was founded in 2022. It monitors 5 platforms: X, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube in 2 languages, Arabic and English, location in Tel Aviv. 6,000 pieces of content vetted and counting. 150,000 pieces of content flagged as highly likely to be anti-Semitic, waiting for review. And what is their success rate on getting this content removed? 32.1% average rate of removal across all platforms in 2023. There it says data speaks louder than words. So here we have Unit 8200, effectively Israeli military spy unit, censoring posts on all of the Meta platforms and getting them removed. And I can't recommend again and again highly enough to listen to the interview that Mike and I did with David Miller on the Zionist movement in Britain, but he does also include the United States. But I think the more we go into this, Mike, the more really sinister this entire movement is and how it's affecting every sector of our daily lives, basically, and our freedom of speech.
Absolutely. And it's a huge infrastructure, a huge network with huge amounts of money. And of course, when we've got companies that are spawned through Unit 8200 doing this kind of work, at the same time they're doing so-called cybersecurity work, and therefore getting, everybody requires to have cybersecurity software. So they're getting paid huge amounts of money every month in subscription fees and so on. This is it's a good business model for them, but and hugely influential. So keep watching for more on this. But Charles, where does that take us?
It takes us to the recurring theme, the theoretical construct in the UK at least of geoengineering, which we've been talking about for a long time now. And since the last COP meeting last year, it's been pushed further and further towards the front of the queue. And now the BBC has taken it up. So we'll talk in a bit about the apparent, or at least the science that's put forward, but also the language that's being used. And I've highlighted the text there, or at least put a box round. Conspiracy theories swirl about geoengineering, but could it help save the planet? So the conspiracy theory part is the significant detail here. And we have Simon King, a lead weather presenter with the BBC, saying, if we can't control rising global temperatures by drastically cutting carbon emissions, could something called geoengineering be a way to cool the planet? So from what he says, the interesting detail, of course, is to point out that if he's saying rising global temperatures, which of course is highly debatable in the first place, but if that can't be controlled by drastically cutting carbon emissions, then how is he suggesting that anthropogenic activity in the first place is indeed increasing the world's temperatures? But nonetheless, he goes on, or at least the article goes on, with yet another rather childish diagram of how geoengineering could cool the atmosphere. And I would say that the purpose of this is just to cement in the brains of those that watch this the idea that this could be done with technologies, with infrastructure that already exists. So we see an aircraft and a ship. We talk about stratospheric aerosol injection, releasing tiny particles to reflect solar radiation back to space. And again, marine cloud brightening, which we've talked about in the past. So the idea, sorry, Mike.
We shouldn't worry because it's not to scale.
Indeed, it's not to scale, no. So I'm not sure which bit should be bigger or smaller. But since the entire scientific construct, there's a lot of closer scrutiny. It could take a while to work that out. But so the idea here seems to be very much to propagandize the notion that, first of all, the planet needs saving, but secondly, that it could be done in a relatively straightforward manner, and of course, that it is entirely necessary. But we come back to this idea of conspiracy theory. So here we see some geoengineering ideas include reflecting sunlight back out to space to cool the Earth, of course, in the right way. And then to demonstrate the absolute futility of some of these projects, which of course suck up enormous amounts of money and public attention, the most advanced area of this is direct air carbon capture with small-scale facilities in operation across Europe, US and Canada. And just to highlight the insignificance of this, they say that they currently remove around 10,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide a year, meaning it would need to massively scale up to make any difference to the roughly 35 billion tonnes we emit globally. So without the assistance of a calculator, I think we can see that it's utterly pointless. And yet people are having it rammed down their throats as something they must believe is possible and worth doing. They go on. The Natural Environment Research Council has invited applications for a 10.5 million fund. And this is to assess whether the negative impacts of the technique are greater than the damage that would be caused by climate change. Of course, hypothesis upon shaky hypothesis. And in particular, solar radiation management being treated with caution. The UK government hasn't deployed the techniques and has no plans to do so. However, they are investing, which begs the question, how much longer are they going to continue to tell us that they are investing in various forms of technology that they have absolutely no intention of deploying? Why would they do that? So we look at something that the University of Exeter was involved in last year, the Department of Atmospheric and Climate Science at the University of Washington, marine cloud brightening, which I spoke about on the 17th of April on the news then. And just to confirm, the UKRI grant of over around £3.5 million to model environmental responses to solar radiation management. Of course, modelling being the key word, so it could be wildly inaccurate, like a lot of them have been. If you want to keep an eye on this sort of thing, I can point you towards geoengineeringmonitor.org, which has a mapping tool that shows you all the live theoretical and indeed practical projects that are going on all over the world.
And we should make a point that website is a pro climate change.
Yes, exactly. It absolutely is. And so this is the fundamental difference, particularly within the United Kingdom. This is being talked about as though it is purely hypothetical, whereas of course there are other parts of the world where they openly declare that they are trying to modify the weather. So we'll just go back to the slide that I put on screen and we talk about the language. So you may remember that UK Column attended the Sounds Beautiful Festival in Dorset a few weeks ago, and this was written up by a journalist in the Times as being Glastonbury for conspiracy theorists. And the reason I use this language is that it recurs and it brings one back to the PREVENT guidance, which is the sort of anti-extremism, anti-terrorism project. And they say the aim of PREVENT is to stop people from becoming terrorists or supporting terrorism. And within that text, they talk about terrorist ideology being a set of beliefs which has several concepts or tools that include narrative, propaganda, grievances, and conspiracy theory. So there's a link here between people who might dismiss either climate change or geoengineering as a conspiracy theory being linked to terrorism. And this indeed comes back to what the United Nations were teaching in a module in 2018 on international terrorism. And it's a very significant detail because it goes back to the coining of the term terrorism, going back to the reign of terror in France and the French Revolution between 1793 to 94, during which the revolutionary government directed violence and harsh measures against citizens suspected of being enemies of the revolution. And here we are again with the updated definition of extremism, particularly there, item 2, talking about undermining or overturning or replacing the UK's system of liberal parliamentary democracy and democratic rights. So it looks very much like we are getting ever closer to the original definition of terrorism. And in fact, I would encourage you to go and read the definition of terrorism as per the Terrorism Act 2000 and consider what the government did in 2020 and what they're trying to do now. But it seems to me that the fallout from the hypothesis that, first of all, climate change is actually a genuine thing and that it is being affected by the activities of mankind and not indeed just a natural process, if indeed it is occurring, a natural process that the world will undergo constantly. But it's really to suggest that people who don't believe the narrative version of events are conspiracy theorists and they are wrong, and therefore to use the trigger terminology of conspiracy theorist is at once separating people along that line, but also it's bouncing people into a position of knowing that they have to believe a certain thing because they've been told that the opposite is a conspiracy theory, which is why geoengineering is such a sort of a volatile subject to be dealing with, because it does, if carried out, of course, it does affect the way in which the climate could be affected in a very, very negative way. Mike, I'm sure you've got many a thought on this, which perhaps might come out in extra or no.
Well, we'll keep it for extra, I think, and yes, so we'll keep that for then. Okay, let's move on. If you like what the UK column does, you would like to support us, support.ukcolumn.org is the place to go. £5 a month is what it costs to become a member, and we do need your support. We want to say thank you once again to everybody that is supporting us this way. That's what keeps us going. If you can't do that, or in any case, do share our material, because we are censored by the algorithms. The latest platform we have no access to is facebook.com. Share material you find on ukcolumn.org and ukcolumnextracts.co.uk in particular. There's also a Telegram channel, as well as the BitChute and Odyssey channels as well. If you'd like to pick something up at the UK Column shop, of course, that helps us very much too, and that would be appreciated. And as we've mentioned, do pick up a copy if you haven't got one yet of Your Life in Their Hands. I'm going to say thank you very much to Christopher at LSB Productions on YouTube for highlighting this piece of work and giving it a very good description, a very good review. Thank you. The word was escaping me for a second. So thank you to Christopher for that. That has helped a lot. Yesterday you did the interview with Edward Bartlett on SAVE.
Yes, exactly. And Edward is a fascinating person to listen to because his knowledge is very deep on effectively the sort of neo-Marxism, but also the legal and medical side of gender transitioning, particularly where surgery is concerned, and how that is dealt with in terms of the legal battle against people who have effectively been put in a position where they have not had informed consent to the surgery that they've undergone. So I really would encourage you to listen to that to understand exactly what can be done to counter this movement.
And share it. And tomorrow at 1 p.m, an interview with Joy Warren, who's speaking about fluoridation. Thank you. Consultation ending at the end of the month. So that will go out tomorrow at 1 p.m. Join us for that. Another reminder of the date for your diary, 19th of October, 2024. That's a Saturday at a venue in Bristol. We will let you know more details very, very soon.
Then we've got an exhibition called Died Suddenly, an art exhibition, which is being organised by Jake Fern. I've updated his email address, jakehfern@yahoo.co.uk, or indeed to look at his website, jakefern.co.uk. But it's to be in London in November, and he'd be grateful for any support, or indeed anyone who has connections to somebody who may have died suddenly, and to put the focus back on the enormous issue of excess deaths. So please get in touch with Jake about that.
Okay, thank you. Vanessa, let's speak to you again, and this time Middle East and, the expansion of the conflict into Yemen.
Yep, the expansion of the conflict into Yemen by Israel directly. In other words, Israel attacks Yemen directly, not through proxies as it has been doing since 2015, working through Saudi Arabia and the UAE, with, of course, also US and UK backing to try and decimate the country of Yemen. So basically on Saturday, Israel struck the Yemen port of Hodeidah after Ansarullah resistance movement, always described as Houthi rebels in Western media, attacked Tel Aviv. So what happened with the attack on Tel Aviv? Here I just point out that all Israelis, this was from an article in Haaretz quite recently, all Israelis instinctively understand that a strike on Tel Aviv represents a strike on Israel's ability to lead a normal life in wartime. We can do without Eilat, Sderot, Matura, Kafr Blum, but we can't without Tel Aviv. And I would also point out, the Yemeni drone, which traveled over 2,300 miles, traversing Libya and Sudan to reach its target, an area very close to the US embassy, that in fact the Harkiria central military base, which is a huge area, is in the center of Tel Aviv. So when Israel is claiming that Hamas is basically leading to the death of civilians in Gaza, which is a concentration camp, Israeli military is placed in the center of Tel Aviv in civilian areas. CNN and virtually every single Western media outlet echoing, of course, the Israeli line that basically Hodeidah had been used to attack international shipping in the Red Sea, but also to receive weapons from Iran. This is basically not true because Hodeidah was the only humanitarian aid entry into Yemen for the 23 million starving Yemeni people that have been under a blockade enforced by the UN since 2015. So a quick look at where Hodeidah is on the map of Yemen. It's over to the west there on the Red Sea coast. An image of the flames that rose after the targeting of the Hodeidah port area and the oil company, which led to the death of 6 Yemeni oil company employees and the injury of perhaps more than 83 civilians. These were satellite images, put together by Maxar Technologies, just showing pre the attack and then the various stages of damage to Hodeidah port during the Israeli attack. 12 F-35s took off from the Nevatim airbase, I believe, were refueled in the air and traveled 1,800 kilometers to carry out this fairly devastating attack. However, the officials did put out a statement within 6 hours to say that, in fact, electricity had been restored to most areas that depend on supply from Hodeidah itself. And as I said, what is interesting, and yes, this is an escalation because this is a direct attack by Israel, from Israel, not basically apparently condoned by the US or the UK. And what this will do, as the Yemenis have stated very clearly, it will lead to an expansion of their attacks on Israel. And of course, the attack on Tel Aviv was a demonstration of their ability to do so and to bypass the Israeli air defense. So first of all, there is recent news that Yemen, Ansarullah, the resistance movement, have opened a military coordination office in Iraq to collaborate with the Iraqi resistance, which of course regularly carry out attacks against Israeli targets from inside Syria. And then you have in Al-Mayadin, Ansarullah warned swift and unprecedented retaliation to Israel. And within that article, we can see Hazem al-Assad had added that the Zionist enemy has opened the gates of hell by targeting Yemen's Hodeidah port and the port's military and security centers deep inside the occupied Palestinian territories will be under the fire of the Yemeni army. He stressed that certain Arab countries have crossed the red lines by supporting the Zionist enemy, opening land corridors in lieu of the Red Sea, which is the United Arab Emirates, and opening their airspace, which is Jordan and I believe Saudi Arabia, which provided intelligence previously, and calling the Hamas movement terrorist. We warn them that their answer is on the way. So very clearly, we're seeing an expansion and an escalation in the region.
Thank you, Vanessa. And Charles, let's sticking with international affairs. Let's look at Rwanda.
We will, yes. It's a very small country in the Great Lakes region of Africa, one that very few British people have ever been to, and yet one that occupies quite a fair amount of parliamentary time, but also is in the headlines at the moment. So we'll have a quick look at a recent speech by Yvette Cooper speaking about Rwanda.
4 volunteers being sent to Rwanda isn't a deterrent to anyone for anything at all. And the idea that he would spend £10 billion on this fantasy, this fiction, this gimmick, rather than ever do the hard graft. Actually, £700 million has already been spent on sending Just 4 volunteers in 2.5 years. Now, we had often warned that it would frankly be cheaper to put them up in the Paris Ritz. Frankly, it turns out, it would actually be cheaper to buy the Paris Ritz.
So there we are, straight back into it, trying to score political capital from an issue that really has been confected from nowhere and is in effect a charade and a smokescreen because, of course, it distracts from the very real issue of legal migration, Rwanda, of course, being an apparent deterrent to those who would come illegally and migrate into the United Kingdom. But also it distracts from what's been going on in Rwanda, which had a bill put forward to deem it as a safe place to be able to, in effect, deport people. Now, Paul Kagame, the long-standing president of Rwanda, has just been re-elected last week with a 99% share of the vote, which should set 1 or 2 alarm bells ringing. And, of course, by the time the election campaign reached its conclusion, there were only 3 candidates standing, one of which was him. And this is what the chair of the Electoral Commission in Rwanda had to say about process by which the candidates were streamlined.
They feel that National Electoral Commission has purposely or intentionally removed some of the candidates. I think this is not true. And I would want to say that in the process of informing the citizens on the procedure, we mention all those details. So maybe briefly, I would say that there is no one who has ever been removed by NEC intentionally. The only thing is that some of them don't follow the laws and the guidelines set for them to be on the list of the country.
So that's how that gets brushed under the carpet there. And of course, that in itself is a further distraction from what Rwanda has been doing in other parts of Africa with the assistance of other agencies. And the focus now is the Cabo Delgado region of northeastern Mozambique. An article in the Financial Times recently telling us that the energy company Total has handed a security contract for a $20 billion gas reserve to the Rwandan state-linked business. So we'll just go through the timeline that has led to this. Of course, there's not enough time, unfortunately, to cover all aspects of this. But in effect, there was a discovery of oil and gas in 2010, which has been deemed to be worth extracting. And of course, it's worth pointing out also that that region of Mozambique is very rich in graphite and rubies. Now, there's been an Islamist insurgency of effectively kind of unknown or indeterminate origins from about 2017 onwards, creating a perilous state of affairs for those that live in the region, but it's not clear quite where it's being funded from or who the insurgents exactly are. But nonetheless, it's drawn in the SADC mission in Mozambique, SAMIM, SADC being the Southern African Development Community. And at the same time, the Rwanda Defence Force came in. Of course, there was very little communication and cooperation between the two, which has led to the withdrawal this year of SAMIM. But in the interim, the EU, among others, have funded the RDF, Rwanda Defence Force, to the tune of 20 million euros. And now, with the withdrawal of SAMIM, the Total has awarded the security contract to Isco Segurança, and we'll come to have a look at exactly who they are in a minute. But here's the European Council announcing the funding to the Rwanda Defence Force of £20 million. And as the French Institute of International Relations points out, Rwanda expects economic rewards after the success of its army in Mozambique, which suggests very much the motivation for wanting to offer assistance to Mozambique in the first place from Rwanda was, of course, because of such a benefit to them, at least financially. Now, the background to this is that the Isco Segurança company is in effect an offshoot of Crystal Ventures, which was set up in 1995, just after the so-called 100-day genocide against the Tutsi people, which was, according to the narrative, ended by Paul Kagame leading the RPF, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, back into Kigali. But nonetheless, this has effectively been the platform by which the RPF have continued to invest both within and without Rwanda. It was formerly known as TriStar Investments. It's reckoned to be worth in the region of $500 million. And of course, it owns the security company ISCO, which is shown here on screen. So really a brief segment on Rwanda, which of course has many, many complexities. And it just goes to show that whilst we hear about it a lot in Parliament, that is in effect a complete distraction. But what it does demonstrate is the absolute coincidence, of course, of creating or the illusion of instability and money being drawn in from all quarters, particularly the EU, but from other governments, and indeed from the huge corporate entities like Total Energy. So we'll keep an eye on exactly which direction this goes in, but also how this might set a precedent for other countries doing similar things, and indeed what the UK, if at all, pays any attention to.
Okay, thank you for that. Now let's come back to the UK and online safety, and we'll begin with Ofcom's announcement that they have fined TikTok £1.875 million for providing inaccurate data on safety controls. So what are they saying here? This is because TikTok failed to accurately respond to a formal request for information about its parental controls safety feature. So Ofcom saying gathering accurate information from regulated companies is fundamental to our job as a regulator. Firms are required by law to respond to all statutory information requests from Ofcom in an accurate, complete and timely way. This includes providing accurate and complete information. In this case, Ofcom sought information from video sharing platforms to inform a planned report highlighting the safety measures they have in place to protect children from harmful content. That report was published in December, but TikTok took too long about it. And so Ofcom has fined them $1.875 million. But that includes a 25% off deal that they did because TikTok decided to cooperate. So they got a special 25% off voucher and they used it. So in the meantime, then Virgin and O2 today have been announced their collaboration with Internet Matters, which is a pressure group that they're part of, to spotlight online safety harms in what they're describing as a powerful new film. Now, I'm not going to show you the film because it's not really that powerful. It's not really that interesting, but this is all about children and making sure that children are safe online. And so they've set up a website for it. Here it is. It's called Find the Right Words. So if you search for Find the Right Words, you'll be able to watch the film and see what they're talking about. Now, of course, O2, being a mobile operator, part of owned by Virgin Media now, they have a section on their website on age-restricted content and age verification. And this comes back to the digital ID stuff that we were talking about at the very beginning. But it's also about parental controls. And of course, if you switch on parental controls, you can restrict children or anybody using the particular mobile phone from accessing content they claim, which is listed as being over 18 content by the British Board of Film Certification. So the BBFC is now providing ratings for content that's online as well, and that's feeding into Ofcom and into the various providers and so on. But the point here is that there are no solutions to this issue of internet safety for children from a technology point of view, because in 5 minutes, any half-aware child or teenager can get around these. I mean, for example, here's just one example, the free app from Cloudflare, which is called 1.1.1.1, which effectively creates a VPN, which will subvert any of these protections that the mobile operators are providing. That's just one example of many. It's not hard if kids want to get around these types of limitations for them to get around these limitations. Everybody knows this, and therefore we've got to question what the actual motivation for these types of initiatives is. Is it really about protecting children, or is it about censorship and preventing access to certain, or at least trying to prevent access to certain types of content for the rest of us in the guise of protecting children? Many, many more questions to ask about that. But in the meantime, in a related issue then, we've got the Telegraph newspaper, and the question is whether the Telegraph is going to exist for too much longer, or what the deal is going to be done, what deal is going to be done at the end of the day. Sky News has an update for us, and that is that Anton LaVey, otherwise known as Nadeem Zahawi, the former vaccines minister and Chancellor of the Exchequer, is pulling together a deal. He's believed to be pulling a £600 million deal together in order to buy the Telegraph, which is still under a lot of debt at the moment, and not really sure how it's going to survive unless somebody buys it. He's apparently got backers, billionaire backers, including the Rubin family, but many others as well, including this group, Redbird. Now, Redbird was involved in a previous effort to buy the Telegraph up until a few months ago, when the government stepped in and said, no, well, actually, because Redbird's main backers are the United Arab Emirates, we can't have a foreign nation owning a press organ in the UK. And so they set out, they stopped that particular deal going ahead. But nonetheless, Zahawi seems to have this same group involved in his initiative. So it'd be very interesting to see what happens here, whether the Telegraph is actually bought under this deal or not, and whether the new British government is perhaps more sympathetic to the idea of UAE money coming in and buying up the Telegraph. I mean, just to give an idea of how determined Redbird was to get hold of it, they paid off half of the £1.2 billion of debt that the Telegraph owes to Lloyds Bank. And they effectively got nothing for it other than a note saying that they are now owed money because the government stepped in and said, no, you can't have it. So this is clearly why they're trying to pull together a new deal to buy this newspaper, and we'll see where that goes.
Absolutely, and how they're going to convince people to read it.
Well, that's another question.
That would be a big one. Now, land use, agriculture, which we've talked about a lot this year. The government have finally and relatively recently released statistics from 2023. As you can see, no expense spared with the cover of the publication. But just a few of the details from it. And bearing in mind, this is for 2023. So even though there has been a much greater shock to the system through weather and the environmental schemes that we've seen in 2024, from 2023, the utilised agricultural area is reckoned to be about 70% of the total land area, which is down from it being 71% previously. The horticultural area is down 5%. The uncropped arable area is up 13.5%. Beef herds down nearly 4%. Lambs down just over 6%. Pigs down 10%. Poultry down 2.9%, and of course the population of the United Kingdom up by approximately 650,000 in the year, according to the Office of National Statistics. And I thought we'd just have a look at that in graphic form, because this is from the Migration Observatory, and it shows data only in fact up until 2022, but of course with the predominantly enormous influx of Ukrainians shown there on the right-hand side. But it shows the differentiation between net migration and natural change. Natural change, I'm not exactly sure how that's defined for the purposes of this graph, but that represents only the very, very small navy blue piece at the top of the chart. Now, all of this falls within the context of the new government, and exactly what are they going to be doing in this area? Is there going to be change or not? And this is from their manifesto. Effectively, they're banging the same old drum. They talk about championing British farming whilst protecting the environment, even though they don't tell the public exactly how they're going to be able to do it, but they do want to set a target for half of all food purchased to be purchased locally. They're going to say that they're making the environment land management schemes work for farmers and nature, even though that seemed to be something that the Conservative government got mostly back to front. Significantly, they talk about eradicating bovine TB and ending what they describe as the ineffective badger cull. So that will fit in with all the forthcoming and anticipated biosecurity measures, and we have to consider particularly the push towards the supposition that bird flu will be affecting humans later this year. Now, I've entitled this bit Unchanged, because the other bit, in terms of land use, of course, relates to the NPPF, the National Policy Planning Framework, and in actual fact, they're not really going to change it at all, but they say they're going to strengthen the presumption in favour of sustainable development, which comes directly from the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And indeed, they go on and say, without changing its purpose or general extent, Labour will take a more strategic approach and they will release greenbelt land. But of course, they're cooking the book slightly by referring to it as lower quality grey belt land, even though, of course, it is the same thing. And it will be prioritised for development, but there will be golden rules. We'll see how that plays out. But of course, we should consider that this is on top of the enormous tracts of land that are now being used for solar, as it's being regarded as critical infrastructure, and indeed the relaxation of rules on onshore wind, but also for the change in the growth of crops, particularly with biofuels, bioenergy in mind. But just to show that it's good business for some, the Crown Estate has delivered a record 1.1 billion net revenue profit for the public finances. I think that's a bit questionable, but that's double. They've effectively doubled their income on the basis that so much has been thrown at offshore wind. Now, the other thing that comes up in terms of planning follows a segment that Mike did on Monday, which concerned the Holocaust Memorial Bill in Victoria Tower Garden, just south of the Palace of Westminster. And I want to go back to this because it is very significant that this bill has carried over from the previous Parliament into this one. And the text there shows, first of all, House of Commons briefing paper, but I've crossed out the abolition of slavery, votes for women and democracy, because of course those have existing monuments to them in Victoria Tower Garden, and yet the Holocaust, which did not occur in this country, is deemed to be of such significance that it assumes precedent over all of those things, and it would therefore threaten the Buxton Memorial, the statue to Emmeline Pankhurst, and indeed the burghers of Calais. But specifically, when planning permission was refused previously by Westminster Council, the government appealed and the decision was upheld. And here's the critical part. The appeal judge said that primary legislation would be required to amend the 1900 Act so that planning permission could be given. And that is why we have the Holocaust Memorial Bill. It is not necessarily to enshrine the significance of the Holocaust itself. It is to be able to turn over the planning restriction that is on that land currently. And if you wonder which direction this is going to go in, I should just like to point out from Holocaust Educational Trust that according to this, in England, by law, children are to be taught about the Holocaust as part of the Key Stage 3 history curriculum. In fact, the Holocaust is the only historical event whose study is compulsory on the national curriculum. So that is a significant detail upon which to conclude a section that started about land use, but in effect this is all tied up in the same thing. And as Mike has said consistently throughout this programme and many others, the agenda that Labour has is not in fact a change. It is purely an extension of the policies of the last government, and they're going to be pushing exactly the same things in the same direction. And we will see specifically where this Holocaust Memorial Bill goes, but it seems very likely that it will just be going ahead and all restrictions will just be ignored.
Now, as we know, when asked, Keir Starmer decided that Davos is better than Parliament. He doesn't like democracy very much, and we start to get a clue about how much he doesn't like democracy. So let's put this tweet on screen. This is from Jessica Elgott, and many, many, many other people have been talking about this on X over the last 24 hours. 7 Labour rebels on the SNP amendment on 2 child benefit. So this is about child benefit being denied to anybody that has more, for the 3rd child or above. So 7 people, Apsana Begum, Imran Hussain, Rebecca Long Beeley, Ian Byrne, Richard Bergen, Zara Sultana and John McDonnell voted against this and voted against Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. Last night. They are considered rebels, and so they've been suspended. Now, the response on Twitter has been perhaps as you would expect. Here is somebody saying, responsible adults don't punish innocent kids for what is rightly or wrongly seen as the irresponsibility of other adults. Responsible adults realize not reducing childhood poverty is more expensive long term. Responsible adults do not include Keir Starmer. So the left wing of Twitterati are not happy with them. Here's another example. Sir Keir Starmer actually whips Labour MPs to vote against lifting 500,000 children out of poverty, suspends the MPs who voted to feed them, happy to hand out £3 billion to buy bombs, though. Scum doesn't even begin to describe the Stalinist dictator, we did say. So his own support base, absolutely, or at least the Labour support base, absolutely unhappy with this situation. But of course, the question has to be asked, you know, bearing in mind he has such a majority, 450 MPs, I'm not sure I can't remember what his majority is, must be 200 or something. And he's worried about 7 MPs voting against the whip. It's clear that he is not interested in any MP representing their constituents or their view of what their constituents think. They must only follow what the whips say. And of course, this is why the whipping system is so disastrous in the first place. I'm just going to end with a quick reminder of what Keir Starmer tweeted in 2020. He said, "We must scrap the inhuman work capability assessments and private provisions of disability assessments, scrap punitive sanctions, scrap 2-child limit and benefits cap." So it is perhaps unsurprising, because basically, as far as I can see, Keir Starmer doesn't believe in anything that he ever says. That just a few years ago he was saying we got to scrap the 2-child limit, and then he is whipping his entire party to make sure that they vote to continue the 2-child limit, and suspending anybody that thinks differently. I think we could see where this is going.
I think we can.
Yes. Okay, well, look, we've got to leave it there for today. I'm going to say thank you very much to Vanessa and Charles, and thank you all for watching. We'll be back in a few minutes on the UK Column live stream. If you're a UK Column member for Extra, we hope you'll join us there. If you're not a member, do consider joining us on the UK Column website for Extra. But otherwise, we will see you as usual 1 p.m. on Friday. Don't forget the interview tomorrow, 1 p.m. as usual, on Fluoridation. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.